So, hello, this is a panel. This panel is called The Internet, Civilization's Downfall or Saviour. And basically, I pitched this to the QED organisers a while back because I thought, I really like the Internet, but I'm also worried about it, and I don't know what to think. So basically, I wanted this panel to be just a really interesting discussion of the Internet. I'm not expecting us to draw any conclusions. I suspect the answer to the question, Civilization's Downfall or Saviour, is probably a bit of both. But we'll see.
Spoilers.
So, spoiler alert. Let's see how it goes. There's lots of interesting threads to tug upon, so let's see how it goes. So on the panel today, we've got on my left, we've got Kane, the leader of the UK Pirate Party. He's based here in Manchester, so he's local to us. We've got Angela Saini, science journalist, author. You wrote a book called Geek Nation, which is available at the QED bookstore about sort of technology and engineering in India. And then on the end, we've got Liz Lutgendorff, who is a product designer and content analyst at gov.uk. That's the government digital service. I don't know how we managed to book her either. But there we go. So let's start things off by asking the panel. So what do you, Loz, think is the worst thing about the internet?
The worst. Yes. Well, it's tempted to go straight in with too many pictures of food being tweeted. You know, it's kind of that stuff. I mean, I think sort of starting this out, I think I'm going to do typical politician thing and do a slight sidestep here. But I think we've actually just got to start out. It's like, what do we mean by the internet? It's that whole thing about, for most people, the internet is that thing what comes out of your phone and your laptop and your tablet. So, I mean, it's so in the kind of the wider cultural sense, we've probably lost that battle between being specific when we're talking about internet as opposed to the web. But I think essentially, what we're after today here is the web, really, and that's about. And I think it's important to have that distinction because I think internet, as how I'd kind of can characterize it, that's about communication. And also to the web being about information. And that's essentially what Tim Berners-Lee set out in his proposal. That's about accessing information. So kind of, the worst thing in terms of accessing information, well, I think something we'll come on to talk a lot more, and that's about mass surveillance.
And Angela, what do you think is the worst thing about the internet?
I think it's people. You can't go on the internet for all the racism and the sexism and the trolls and the government surveilling you. I mean, if people would just get off the internet, I think that would be great. It would be perfect.
And Liz, what about you?
I think it's just terrifyingly large. I have my corners of the internet where I hang out in both work and elsewhere, but there's so much more that I completely don't know exists, that I don't understand, and then it just seems to get larger all the time. And how can any one person or any one organization or something know what's going on all the time? And how can we make sure that it remains, as we think it is most of the time, a force for good, but how do we know when it turns into a force for bad?
So I think one sort of through line in all of your answers is perhaps sort of the idea of free speech and expression, because we've got mass surveillance and obviously there's a worry that this could impact that. Angela mentioned people, as they have the unfortunate habit of speaking freely a lot of the time, and Liz obviously wants to express herself on the internet in these different places. I was wondering, perhaps there's an interesting point of discussion where, given the disruptive effect of the internet, what has this done to free speech? The traditionally, I guess the thing is we think, oh, it's brilliant for free speech, but is it? How do we think it has changed how we can express ourselves? Has it been a good thing for that? Anyone can take that one.
Right. Well, I think absolutely. I mean, I think I'd take completely the opposite view. I'm kind of also scared that it's not large enough. I'm particularly thinking about, in terms of best figures, in terms of 2012, about 2.4 billion of the global population being online, if you'd wish to express it that way. And that's where also I'd like to involve more people in that. Yeah, it is this huge challenge, and I think, absolutely. One of the things that this, in terms of what you brought up, Angela, is one of the huge issues at the moment is also how, in terms of freedom of expression, free speech, and how we work with that. It seems to me it's also, but that's, I want to come back to information. I think more information, better information, possibilities for more discussion, that's really key, and possibilities for discussion, for criticism. I think, again, I'm not going to go super techno-utopian on this, but I think we have opened up a possibility to for new conversations, so also for critical thinking, and also for discussion, and in a way that we've never had in terms of globally before. And I think that can only be a good thing. We might want to come down to sort of into the detail of that, but I don't see any point in hating the haters. This is the real kind of, I think I want to get out of that spiral when discussing this kind of sense of really the kind of the Daily Mail type thinking about that there is it leads to inevitable cesspit. I simply don't accept that.
Anyone else? I mean, Angela, you spent a lot of time in India to write your book, and have looked at the sort of technology industry there. And one thing I was wondering is, whereas we see it as this sort of platform for free speech, is this the same in the developing world? India obviously is still a developing country. There's a lot of they're a lot poorer than we are. Are people seeing the same benefits, or is it maybe a divisive thing? Are the rich people all connected and stuff, and are the poor people not?
Well, there's the way technology is approached in a lot of Asian countries, and by this I mean Korea, China, India, Singapore, is very different from the way we approach it here. So in the West, where these technologies have been around for quite a long time and we've had access to high technology for a long time, we are more skeptical about it. We are more suspicious of it. Whereas in India, where poorer people especially are getting hold of technology for the first time, it's seen as an unequivocal good. So there's fewer privacy fears, for example. People just embrace it and enjoy it and see it for what it is, which is a tool for opening them up to the rest of the world and opening them up to each other. You only have to look at the Indian election coverage and how wonderful this kind of, huge blossoming of thoughts and ideas and opinions on Twitter and on Facebook has been. There's this wonderful new Indian party, the Aam Aadmi Party, which means the Ordinary People's Party, which has sprung up, not because of the internet, I don't think, but certainly facilitated by it. And it's ordinary people who want to be heard and, want to use the internet and use these new forms of communication to link together and create a democratic revolution in India. It's in terms of politics, it's a really vibrant, great democracy anyway, but the internet really pushes it forward, and that's a wonderful thing to see.
And similarly, Liz, you work for the Government Digital Service, so I know you need to be decidedly sort of non-partisan and all of that sort of thing. But is your work at gov.uk, is that helping our free speech and democracy?
I think it is. So, does anyone know what gov.uk is and what GDS is?
Perhaps you should just explain it just for...
Yeah, so we're like the government web presence, and the point of it is essentially to have a single domain for government services. So before there's like hundreds of government web services. So if you need a thing, and you don't know what the thing is or what the target department is, how do you find it? And so we're putting everything in one place, essentially. But while we're doing that, we're trying to make it accessible as possible, because the reading comprehension age of the average citizen is not university level, it's school level. And so bringing all kind of government policy, just general services down to a level that everyone understands, because we should focus all our services in the government to what people can comprehend and then access those services. So I think the interaction that I've had in my daily work has been almost uniformly positive, because people can find what they want quickly. And that's what you want. You don't want to spend hours interacting with the government, right? It's like, I'm going to go do my self-assessment. Oh, what a lovely afternoon. So I think it's important that way, and I think with people who understand the internet and understand how we interact with the internet, kind of making those services accessible, it helps people understand how their democracy functions. It helps people find out the services they need, about policies they don't like or they like and want to support, and things like that. So I think it's been good, and I think people telling us that it's bad and us listening to them is equally as valid, which what I spend most of my day doing, finding out why it's bad and trying to fix it.
You want to go for it?
Yes, if I just want to come in terms of, I think it's been really interesting, just even over the last 2 years, we've seen a real sea change in terms of what we expect now, this kind of phrase of digital by default in terms of interacting with the government, with also key services. So, for example, the universal credit being digital by default. That's why, also from the Pirate Party perspective, we've always said that this is the likely direction that we're going to be going in. Obviously, any attempts to shut down access to the internet, also particularly in terms of the UK perspective, is hugely damaging. That's why we were so vehement about the worst aspects of the Digital Economy Act, because, for that very reason. It was not just because we just wanted free stuff. That's because that's where we saw democracy going, and also participation in key elements, things like gov.uk, but things like universal credit. And we must be really clear that also that access is under threat, and this is the other side. But that's not to do with also technology being evil. That's also about politics and politicians and who we So we just have to look in the myriad stories, Twitter in Turkey, for example. So we cannot and must not take this for granted wherever we are in the world, I think.
Actually, that's really interesting, because what this is sort of this is my grand theory, which one day I hope to publish on. But with regard to these services, like we talk about access to these services, and we worry about, say, governmental interference. But could it work the other way? Do we need to take the services more seriously as powers in themselves? So, for example, we say, we may say on the internet people can speak as freely as they like, but ultimately power is still brokered by Facebook, by Twitter, and so on. So when we have campaigns or whatever to take down an unpleasant Facebook group, like the recent one about women taking photos of women eating on trains, whilst we probably mostly agree that's an unpleasant thing, but should it be treated as a more sort of fundamental or important issue than just a Facebook group? Because ultimately, if you're not on Facebook, you're dead to me, because I'm young and everyone is on Facebook. So it's like if we're cutting off these things, Facebook and Twitter and all these different services, their policies on how these things aren't just policies on whether you can come into my shop or not. It's more fundamental. Should we treat it as a more fundamental thing than that, because these are sort of hegemonic powers, if you see what I mean?
James, is power really mediated by Facebook and Twitter? Is that really the case?
I think to a certain extent it could be, because Facebook have certain guidelines on what they allow.
I think it's only people on Facebook who think that, and not everyone's on Facebook. Really, I only joined Facebook and Twitter because my publishers made me a couple of years ago, and my life is not that different to what it was before I was on Facebook and Twitter. It's just slightly more annoying, because I have this constant feed of people who demand that I reply to them on Twitter if they tweet me, and get angry if I don't. That's some contribution that those things have made to my life. I honestly think that sometimes social media can be a bit of an echo chamber. There are not actually that many people on Facebook and Twitter. I mean, I know people who get very excited because they have 50,000 followers on Twitter. Globally, that's not that many. I mean, that's, and they're not watching everything you're doing. They're basically ignoring 90% of your tweets and occasionally scanning over something you say. That's it.
But isn't there, like, if you looked at the media in the last few years, and we can argue about if the media is relevant as well, but, like, how many times is, like, tell us what you think on Twitter and Facebook, and then the people pop up and have their opinions, and news trends are reflected by what's happening on social media and things like that, and it's more invasive than if you're on them, because it's affecting what you're watching and what you're reading as well.
Well, once again, as I started out by also looking at that distinction, internet and web, but just also you would think, also in a way, all of the way that the media describes it, that also the internet is almost synonymous with social media now, which is, I mean, as Angela says, is a complete mistake, really, to think in that way. And sometimes there are these extraordinary generalizations. I wish I had a quid for every time I'd seen someone on Twitter say, well, Twitter thinks this, and I just want to ask, well, how good is your Japanese and Malay then? I think also, yes, I think there are so incredibly difficult issues. In a way, I don't want to. There's always counter-examples. I mean, we can put up also just the Facebook group that you just mentioned up against, the image of the satirical image of Wonga being taken down from Twitter yesterday. And people, cycles of outrage. The question is, what do we want to do? And it's also that we've seen in terms of if we're wanting to change people's behaviour, well, in so many ways that also the legislation that exists isn't terribly useful, and quite the reverse, that obviously the most ridiculous example being the case surrounding Paul Chambers, the so-called Twitter joke trial. But it's also, well, what are the solutions that people want to propose, really? Kind of heavier policing, heavier blocking? I don't know. I think it's just we have to look into very specific things. If there's actually very specific actual laws broken or real complaints, then you've got to use your political power. It's kind of go and make your police commissioner actually see it as a priority. Good luck with that. But also then, I hate to come back to the old chestnut, but it's about education. It's also that's the tough route. I think there is. But what I always say, there is no automatic press button technological solution to a social problem. That's the key. That's the key thing, and I think that's the mistake of so many governments and actually so many people who've been commenting on these issues. I think there's some kind of easy button you can press, but technology isn't magic.
Do you think that's? I think that's a really interesting point, because I'm thinking of, for example, we have certain outcomes like. The internet has changed things in that we've got outcomes from certain new behaviours which can't necessarily be solved. For example, there's a lot of, rightfully, people are very angry about people being abusive on Twitter, but at the same time, there's no real immediate solution to that unless you want to have Theresa May switching Twitter off at the press of a button. Do you think we need to? Do we need to get used to a world where we can't solve problems quite so easily? Do we need to just? Is it a cultural shift we need? Are we still in flux? Am I making any sense?
Do you know, I think
you can answer the last question first. No.
The issue with the internet is that in some ways, for those of us who are active on the internet, it's made us see what it's like to be a celebrity. So, all these people who in the past would get written about in the Daily Mail or be in the gossip columns and have to develop a thick skin with rumours about them and people saying horrible things about them, now we all get a taste of what that's like. And it's not nice. Nobody likes it. Nobody wants to be trolled or have horrible things written about them. But to some extent, that's, we can't escape it. Like you say, the internet's too big for us to police it effectively. And we don't really want anyone to turn it off because we actually do like it. We find it useful. If we wanted someone to turn it off, we would switch it off, wouldn't we? We're quite capable of doing that. So in some ways, we just have to be like the celebrities of the past and just say, it's the internet. It may not disappear tomorrow like newspaper used to become fish and chip shop wrapping, but we have to live with it. And I've had to do that. People have written stuff about me on the internet which hasn't been true. And I just, you get angry about it, and then you just think, well, who cares? Let it go. Let it go, move on.
I kind of wonder if it's the thing that we're going to obsess with. So, the other thing I do is I study history. So you look what people are obsessed about in, a certain age, and no one cared about it the next age. When they first started publishing novels, it was like, oh my God, all the women are just going to think, they're just going to their brains are going to fall out of their head because they're reading this fiction thing, you know? And that ended the next generation because they all grew up reading novels. And the same thing today. It's like I go home to Canada and my nephews don't care about any of the stuff I care about. They are really interested in Flappy Bird, which I can't comprehend. But, you know, like, they're going to grow up with this existing, all the services, all the kind of infighting, all the social media and stuff, and it's going to be background noise. And so their problems are going to, I think, are going to fundamentally look different than our problems.
Are we worrying over things we can't change then? Are the kids of today growing up, are they going to be used to having people slag them off on Twitter, whereas we're more precious or something?
Yeah. My nephews haven't grown up in a world without an iPhone. Can you imagine that? Like, I remember when there was no internet. I'm frightened of not an internet now, but like, it's a fundamentally different mindset that I don't think people necessarily have grasped yet, because the people who are like that still can't vote, for example. So their issues will be brought up when they're 18.
My 9-month-old took a selfie on my phone the other day, which just goes to show you.
That sounds like an episode of Jeremy Kyle, doesn't it?
So could it be a generational thing then? I mean, whilst we're sat here, you know, observing these new phenomena. I mean, for example, even like mass surveillance, are the next generation, whilst we're sat here worrying about it, going, oh yes, let's support Edward Snowden or whatever, are the kids of tomorrow going to be just like, well, that's what happens, and live with it? Are they going to be more apathetic towards it?
No. I would actually kind of say what's been sort of interesting about that phenomenon has been, actually, I think it's been very much young people who've been leading that movement and actually been most concerned. And, you know, when I went to talk to a whole bunch of school kids, and also one asked me that question. I would say, well, why does nobody care? And actually just one guy put up and said, I care. So yes, thank you. Yeah, I think there is a major thing one real big thing that I would really like to squash today that really bugs me is that false elision between oh, well, actually young people do lots of stuff on social media and actually they have no sense also that so privacy is disappearing, so actually then what the state doesn't matter because it's all the kind of same thing. Flat doodle, because it's precisely as you say, is it's also, again, not all power is mediated by Facebook. Also, you know, Facebook doesn't have drones yet that will shoot you dead.
Amazon want them.
Yeah, but give it time. No, but it's precisely that difference between also the decisions that you make on whatever level, informed level, in terms of your own presence online, and then what governments who really do have power and money, they're able to do. So I think quite the reverse, that I think this is becoming a much more key, significant political issue, and will continue to do so.
And I don't think we're unaware of it. I've gone to a talk within a government department on the results of the Oxford Internet Attitude Survey. And it's fascinating because you can see the generational rifts, because it's like people over 50, internet's a bit weird, but I can use it to talk to someone on Skype, and that's great because they're in another country. That's basically my parents' attitude. And then the kind of bit that we're in, the half that grew up with it and without it, we have this kind of ambiguous position. So the more educated you are, the more likely you are to be concerned. But it is the younger group that are completely savvy about every aspect of it. They're most concerned about privacy, they're most concerned about transparency, and they really, really know what they're talking about, because not only did they grow up with it, it's like part of their education. And where I had to grow up and learn Windows operating system, they're learning, that's just a fabric of reality that they have these operating systems. But what they get to do is actually understand the nature of the beast, as it were. And it's great. I think it's fundamentally important. And I'm fascinated to see how that's going to kind of influence our lives. It's just going to take us by storm that everyone's going to be concerned about this. But it's not. It's going to be there all the time. It's just going to be at an age where they're going to have the most political influence.
So this maybe I'm going to try and segue this into my next question. So one other thing I want to talk about before we open up to questions from everyone else is I wonder if anyone's got any thoughts on the impact of the internet on sort of existing structures, because I've been referring to it as disruptive for this entire time. Yet if we look at things like the recent invasion of Crimea by Russia, that's just good old-fashioned nationalism. Both Ukraine and Russia are sufficiently connected countries. They can email each other. They're sufficiently globalized. They've all these global brands. They all use Twitter and Facebook and all these other things. Yet still, at the end of the day, it was good old-fashioned Russian nationalism that sent the tanks rolling into Crimea. Is the internet not ever? Is it just nothing? Is ultimately, are there things we can't change? There was a question there somewhere. I'm sure there was.
Well, I think to a certain extent we do need to be a little. I think we've sort of particularly overstated the case when for example, with what was kind of dubbed at the time the Arab Spring, and I know in terms of also the kind of the activists that we talked to from that, say that was there was a lot of, this is the kind of social media revolution. It wasn't quite like that. So I think sometimes we like to kind of overstate the case, even for someone who's kind of as a cheerleader for technological development, as maybe I am. But I think it is hugely disruptive because it asks some very fundamental questions, and maybe perhaps not in terms of some of those kind of identity things, but obviously it's kind of where we come from with the Pirate Party thing is the so-called piracy thing, is that we as far as we're concerned, it adds a fundamental question about how both information knowledge, information knowledge and the economy function. I mean, my big question has always been not, how will artists make a living now, but the question is, if Tim Berners-Lee's vision of information can be accessed as will, why the hell aren't we doing it? We can have it all there. What's stopping us? And that's the huge disruption which we are underway, and has been underway for a decade, I'd say, and it's really rumbling.
And I saw Angela right note.
Should I?
Go for it.
I'm not an early adopter of technology by any means. I'm actually quite late to most things. But if you speak to very early internet users who used it in universities at the beginning, they always complain about what the internet has become. If only it could go back to its roots and it would be perfect. We were so great in the beginning. It was, it's just become horrible the more it's become accessible to other people. And if you...
People again.
Are these like the internet's UKIP or something?
NetKip.
So last month, you may have read that Tim Berners-Lee and his followers have set up this initiative called The Web We Want, which is a kind of campaigning group to ask that the internet go back to its roots, essentially, and become free and open, to end government surveillance, to stick to those core values. But I think the problem is the internet was doomed the second it was created, wasn't it? Because we are, like I said at the beginning, we're people, and we can't just rule out the majority of what we are inside and say the internet's only going to be the good of us. It's only going to be the best information. It's not going to have any porn. It's not going to have any sexism. It's not going to have any racism. Because frankly, there are a lot of racist, sexist people out there interested in porn. Everywhere. They're everywhere. And so what do we do? We can't get rid of them. We can't. I think it's what we're in danger of doing, especially when we talk about the internet and democracy, which is going back to your question, is treating the internet as a separate entity. It's not. It's just us at the end of the day. And you can't have a war where the internet will fight that war for you, or it will decide whether to go into that war for you. Social media is not going to solve that problem. At the end of the day, it's about people, individuals making decisions about their own lives. When you're on the front line, when your house is about to be bombed, you're not going on Twitter or thinking about Facebook. You're thinking about that moment when you're about to lose your family. And these are the real human choices that people face all over the world. And the internet is just space where once we would have talked to our neighbours about it, and now we talk to each other on the internet about it. It's just a forum, and it's just us.
And on that note, I think we should open things up. Has anyone got any questions about the internet? Also, we need a volunteer for the roving mic. I'm looking at Trish. Thank you. Okay, so down the front, first of all.
Yes, it's on. I was going to ask you a question, because this is something that crops up regularly in my working life, and I work with mentally ill young people, which is internet bullying. And the argument I get into time and again is, if it wasn't for the internet, this wouldn't be happening, we mustn't stop them having access to the internet. And by the way, not all people over 50 fall into that category. And I have this argument with people who are younger than myself, and I end up quoting Plato that widening literacy was going to lead to the end of the world as we know it. But there's one problem I come up time and again, is that, yes, bullying has always happened, and it's happening on the internet now when it used to be on pieces of paper passed in class. But what they come back to me again and again is, but it's not going away. It's there, and we can't take it down, and it's going to be there forever, and these young people are constantly plagued by it. Is there anything, does that make sense to you? Do you have any thoughts about how you can take that forward?
Well, I know how that feels. Just recently, somebody wrote something defamatory about me on the internet, and I complained to the person who wrote it. I mean, this is part of the problem with citizen journalism. There's all these people that think they're journalists. They write one-sided things. They don't get the other person's side of the story, and they call that journalism. You can write whatever you want on the internet. That's the problem with it. Until somebody wonderful comes along and takes down everything that hurts somebody else's feelings, I don't know how it's going to be fixed. And for young people, and I've done stories on cyberbullying, so I know how devastating it can be, and it causes loss of life, it causes people to take their own lives. The only answer I can think of is that you understand that it may be there forever, but hardly anyone's going to read it, especially in the distant future. No one's going to see it, because there is that much on the internet. And, you have to... I don't know how very young people now relate to the internet. Do they take things as personally as we do? Yeah, maybe they do. But they're going to, differently from me and my generation, I think, they also can't live without it. I feel like I could switch off the internet if I wanted to, stop using it. They don't feel that they can. So they have to find new ways of dealing with those issues, and perhaps developing coping mechanisms for it. But it has to be a personal thing, because I don't think the internet's going to do it for them. Then I don't think anyone else is going to do it.
I recently made a video that went a bit viral, and I had hundreds of people reminding me that I was fat. So that was, but that was delightful. The thing that made it nicer though was the fact that there was lots of people who reminded me I wasn't fat and said nice things. So on balance, it was all right. I don't know what point I'm making. Next question. Yes. Next question. Let's go to Martin over there.
I train scientists in using social media, and disproportionately, there are women who look at it and see what happened to Mary Beard or Christina Ciado Perez, and say, well, I'm not going to go on these forums, Twitter or Facebook, because I don't want that to happen. How worried should I be about this selective censoring and selective participation of women or other LGBT groups or whatever, not taking part in what is becoming sort of public discourse, the public sphere? Should I take, it seems like from the panel, it's not the totality of public discussion, influential discussion, it's only Facebook, so it should matter. But it seems like it should matter, because if women don't go out in the streets because there's nasty things happen in the street, that's bad for society as a whole. It doesn't matter that street isn't the whole of the public space.
You have more experience with this.
Do I?
We were talking about it.
I don't really know. I think fundamentally as well, like, as much as bad things are like propagated and there's these kind of internet personalities and things that pop up, ultimately loads of stuff on the internet is transient. And most of the things that affect change are people who become politicians or who lobby government or start grassroots campaigns and actually get people involved. And so I think in some respect, like, there's probably people from 10 years ago and things that happened, like Y2K. Oh my God, do you remember Y2K? It's not stuff that keeps happening. It's like it fades and it goes. And there are probably some destructive things, and those people will galvanize and will form campaigns and will lobby people if they think it's bad. But some of the things that are also pervasive have been pervasive for 50 years, and we haven't solved them. So in one respect, it's like it is worrying, and we need to do more to do it. But I wouldn't worry a lot about kind of people who are YouTube famous for a day. Or anything like that. But it is a problem. But if you're worried, you should do something about it, and you should find people who want to do things about it.
But absolutely. But I think your concern is very valid, and I think I'm really interested in this intersection. Obviously, from where I come from is the more speech, the better. Is actually being able to, and particularly you kind of also brought up in terms of perhaps LGBT young people, and again, that's kind of an area where I've been campaigning for 20 years, and also I would say that this is also precisely where we can network and get and actually really support, and why it's really also real opportunities to support and campaign, but also why that we were so vehement in warning against default web filtering, because we said precisely it would, for example, cut off young LGBT people from vital sex education and other information they needed. Oh, we were right, and it doesn't really give me any pleasure to say that, but also that's why it's particularly we have to do. What concerns me less is the kind of the big celebrities, but it's also about how we support people who aren't in the public eye, and that's, it seems to me, it's also being able to build and support those communities, and that's but also be aware that that's something that we can do, and we can do and learn, and it can empower us to do that. And I'm just very glad as a gay man I'm now allowed to be able to talk about things like technology and surveillance and security instead of hairdressing. Thank you.
Anyone else? Let's go to Sean, and then we'll go to the back of the room.
I work for ARM, and we are looking at the Internet of Things. How is that going to change stuff? When it's not just people on the internet, it's lots of light bulbs.
I can talk to this. I'm a technology journalist by day. That's my credentials as to why I'm on the stage right now. No, I'm already a participant in the Internet of Things. I've got a thermostat that connects to the internet, and it's the best thing in the world. It's great, isn't it? It changes your life.
It does, except for when it breaks. Then it's not so good.
We honestly dismissed moving into a flat because it didn't have a thermostat we couldn't put on our digital Wi-Fi. Like, it was that bad.
But no, I think more broadly it's really interesting because it's going to make our lives easier, I think. But also, I guess there's the sort of dual thing again of, but that means the governments can surveil us. The government will know how hot my house is. And the thing is, it sounds funny, but like when Google bought Nest, which is another digital thermostat company, the one I've got is called a Tado. It's a very good device. But they bought a company called Nest, which do Wi-Fi thermostats, and the danger was there. The theory was because they monitor the temperature as well, they'd be able to figure out what room of your house you're in or when you're in your house. and like my thermostat will change, because it knows where I am based on my phone, it will heat my house up when I'm coming home. So it's another method to track me. It's astonishing. So I guess we're going to have to play through that thing again.
I'm forever frightened that the government will one day switch off my heating. I'll just be really cold. I spent last year on a fellowship at MIT, and MIT's Media Lab do a lot of work around the Internet of Things. So they're developing lots of amazing gadgets, which one day, hopefully, we'll see in our everyday lives that are mediated by the Internet. One thing that I thought was really fascinating was a pill bottle, which is controlled by your doctor or surgery, that flashes when it's time to take your medicine. which I thought was great, really good, as long as it works. That's the thing with technology, you don't know when things are going to go down, so you have to...
This is going to make me sound insane, but I've got some Wi-Fi plugs. They're made by Belkin, so I can turn the plugs on and off with my phone. I thought, could this be used to commit the perfect murder? By setting up, say, rigging it up so I'd have to...
I'm a bit worried right now.
Where you'd have to switch the power on by plugging the chainsaw in at the wall, leaving the country, and then going to a country that doesn't extradite, and then using the phone to switch the power on to turn the chainsaw on to kill my nemesis.
Don't try this at home, kids.
I wonder if stuff like this is ultimately going to be background noise. Like, you think of the results of even like the Industrial Revolution, or even like 1950s with all like, oh my God, we have appliances that plug into the wall and do things for us. And I wonder if it's going to be the same thing. It's just going to be this extra layer of convenience that most people aren't going to know. Or it'll just be the fabric of our lives, and the only time it'll kind of crop up into our mentality is when it's like, oh, it didn't work. Oh, that's a pain. Now I have to actually turn on the switch. And I wonder if it's that kind of level, like surveillance and stuff. How much of it it's going to be kind of wired in that way, like the Tato and things like that. How much of it is just going to be switches and things like that, and just really not affect us unless they go wrong.
Any more questions? Should we go to the back of the room? Whoever you like. This is Trish choosing a favourite now.
Hi, I'm blind, and the Royal National Institute of the Blind, your national organization, did an international survey, and 90% of all websites on Earth contain one-to-many accessibility problems that prevent people with print impairments from reading the web. The right to read is an absolute. It is a human right stated by the United Nations. Literacy is a basic human right. I know Liz was not going to have a problem with this. She works for the government, and she's by treaty obligated to making her websites accessible. But I'm wondering if the rest of your panel are willing to commit to saying that they will endorse nothing but 100% accessibility because we are victims of scam medicine, and we can't read a lot of skeptical websites. And so you have two options with a website. You can continue discriminating against the largest and most oppressed minority on Earth, which is the United Nations statistic, or you can welcome us in and let us read your websites. And I'd just like to know how each of you are going to move forward on that in the future.
Yeah, of course we're 100% committed to that. What kind of people would we be if we weren't? It's a loaded question in many ways.
Would it be accessible?
Sorry?
If I tried your website right now, is it accessible?
I don't know. I wouldn't know how to make it accessible, but I would hope. There is software out there that reads out what's on a web page to you, doesn't it?
I'm aware of that. I'm blind.
Yeah.
I think
It is a massive problem, and I think prior to GovUK, a lot of government websites were accessible, and like kind of one of our biggest complaints from people that we work with is that it looks plain and it looks boring, but it is accessible. And
I'm willing to have this conversation with anybody at length later, but you can be a perfectly beautiful, accessible website, be 100% accessible. Microsoft's Office 365 online is 100% accessible.
I think things are going to slowly get better because, for example, for two reasons. Number one, web design is moving towards. They've said, it's like we've got cascades and star sheets now which separate out the design from the actual content, which means that you can read the text through different readers. So you can use various software to make it more readable. But then also we've just got better software for reading things. Like I used to work with a guy who had a visual impairment, and he used an iPad. And I thought, how can he use that? Because surely it's just a screen where there's no buttons, there's no sort of sense of touch like you might get with what you used like a type, for Braille or whatever. But because it reads everything out, you can tap everything on the screen, and the screen layout can change to accommodate different sorts of input with massive buttons and stuff. It was, he used it just as everyone else would. So, I think things are going to get better.
Well, good. And It's obviously a really important point. So, yeah, that's what we have to be working towards. And also, I'd love to kind of hear and also talk further with you about what policy implications that has, because also that may well be where it needs to be also pushed from, on a local level, governmental level, the European level, intergovernmental level. This is also why, in particular, we've been, from the Pirate Party side, we've always been particularly unhappy that in terms of the copyright lobby have also been shutting down attempts to make information more accessible. It's also through sort of machine readability. That also particularly for in terms of locking things down for copyright reasons. And this is kind of ongoing on the kind of intergovernmental level at kind of WIPO and the rest. And there is some progress, but we're very disappointed that there has been much heels digging in from groups like the Publishers Association. I think, frankly, that's shameful.
It just occurred to me that the way, I don't know how the software works that reads out web pages to you, but I suspect you require HTML in the website for it to be able to read it. And I'm pretty sure on my website I have put, even though I use GIF images throughout, I've got every single image encoded with HTML as well. So I think you probably could access my website. Yeah, but I will check that for you.
Next question, please.
Not that you'd want to visit my website anyway.
Someone at the back. Chris, you can choose.
Okay, I sit in a flat in Manchester. I connect to a web server in Canada with a database backend in Brazil. I then write really nasty, horrible things about someone from Australia. Which government should be able to slap my hands and tell me to behave?
Does anyone want to have a go at this one?
Well, probably the real immediate answer to this is none of them. Thank you. Yes, that's at the heart of also a lot of the disputes, and it's particularly why we need to be talking intergovernmentally, and also why things like even working at, say, the European Parliament level is kind of what we've been trying to do with things like net neutrality, for example, which there are moves forward. It's for those reasons, is that we've got to talk to each other, and we can't, particularly in terms of that, but for the reasons that you set out, is that we can't think about it in terms of just even on the kind of provincially. So that's that. But also that's why it's really important that we don't give a disproportionate kind of political power to any one particular actor. I mean, I'm thinking, obviously, from my perspective, that will be the United States, and that's kind of what we've kind of seen in relation to kind of, as far as we would see it, in relation to things like Mega Upload, for example. I simply do not accept that the United States, the copyright cops of the world, or indeed any other sort of cops of the world. But again, that's why I kind of would say it's like the answer to those questions, and also so many of the things that you've been talking about, Angela, about politics. When people, who would also bring up the people at the public level, that's what politics is to me. So that's how you get at that, I suppose.
Yeah. That's why Nigel Farage is silly, and we need more global governance to stand up to the structures of globalisation. Anyway, time is against us, so we're going to wrap the panel. I'm going to ask the panel one more quick thing. So, in sort of one sentence or less, internet, yay or nay?
Jane.
Internet, yay. One, because it's my job. I don't want to do anything else. I think it is a really good tool to bring everyone's knowledge of not only government but society and everything. I have lots of commas. It's just a great tool, and we're only as good as our tools. So as long as we have good tools, hopefully we'll be good people.
Angela? Yeah or nay?
Nay. I'm going to go and switch off my computer as soon as I get home. I'm switching my smartphone.
Yay. Let's not be afraid of information in the future Bring it on.
Right, that's 2-1. The internet can stay. Thank you very much. Thank you to Liz. Thank you to Angela. Thank you to Loz. Thank you to Chris for doing the mic. Thank you to the sound guy. Have a good rest of conference, everyone.